Hey, Jazz Bear, how are you doing? Well, it's the last day of December, and tomorrow will be the first day of 2020. And I decided it would be a nice time to read you a story from your great grandma. She wrote it, my mom, and it's going to be about her life in Arkansas. Life in Arkansas is the name of the story. In a state called Arkansas, in a little place called Gurnee, it's 7.5 miles from Hope, Arkansas, and not even large enough to be on a map. I was born. Your great-great-grandma and great-great-grandpa, they lived in California. Well, they lived in a house that Grandpa built with his own hands. It wasn't a real big nor pretty house. Some people might think, but it was a great house. It was set atop large pieces of logs and cut just right so the house could be built on top. Grandpa cut the trees and had them cleaned up and sawed at a lumber mill in Hope, Arkansas. Grandpa brought his new bride to the house, and they had 3 kids in that house. I was born, I am told, in a barn while they put a new roof on the house. And I was paid for with some of the things they had produced on the farm, which means her birth was paid for. The land this house was built on belonged to your great-great-great-grandpa, and his name was Charlie. His wife, Carol, was from England. Wow, from England. And grew beautiful roses. She died when I was 5 years old, so I really don't remember much about her, except that she heated bricks and placed them at the end of the beds so your feet would be all warm and snug. No, we didn't burn our feet. Now, how do you suppose she managed that? I don't know. I said the town I was born in was small. How small? Well, we had a school that your great-great-great-grandfather had built, and a grocery store, and that was it. That's not much, is it? Your great-great-grandfather went to school and graduated from the school that your great-great-great-grandfather built. There were only 3 people that graduated from the school that year. Your great-great-grandfather graduated. Your great-great-grandmother didn't graduate from high school. There were many reasons she had to leave school. One reason was that she was a girl, and in those days girls didn't have an education, or so they say, unless they were going to become teachers, as your great-great-great-Aunt Nellie did. Most of the girls would marry, and the man would work hard, and they would raise a family. Great-great-grandma's dad was very ill too, and someone had to do the work on the farm. Great-great-grandma would work very hard. She got out of bed long before the sun set above the mountains, and she would bring in the mules from plowing when the sun got tired and went to sleep. She was a little girl working like 2 men in those days. When she could, she went to school. And it was wonderful, and she really learned a lot. When she was a young woman, her father died, and her education was over, at least in the schoolhouse. She met and married your great-great-grandfather, Doc. He didn't have to work real hard, not like great-great-grandma. Great-great-grandma was and is a beautiful woman, a hard worker, and great-great-grandpa grabbed her up. He just grabbed her up. He loved her very much. The house that great-great-grandpa built was at the end of a little road. Before you got to the house, you had to pass a huge garden, and that was better than any in the area. This was great-great-grandma's garden, and she raised every vegetable we ate. When they were ready, she would pick them and can them into jars. Isn't that weird how they call it canned and it's put into jars? That's what they called it. She would also make the best soup you ever tasted and can it in jars too. She was a pioneer in so many ways. Great-great-grandfather didn't just sit on a chair and do nothing. He was a farmer and grew corn, sweet potatoes, cotton, peanuts, and sorghum. That's a sweet cane, like a sugar cane, that you made wonderful syrup from. He also drove a school bus when the school finally got one. He could fix anything with his hands. He later worked as a mechanic when the farm didn't make much money and the war was going on. He was a justice of the peace and married many people to each other. A justice of the peace, they can marry people. Isn't that interesting? He even married your great uncle and his second wife to each other. His first wife had died. In this house that great grandfather built were born 3 kids. The first was a boy named Dale. The second was Ruth. Hey, that's me. And the third was Janie. Great-great-grandma chickened out and had great Aunt Janie in a hospital because Dale and Ruth were both born in the barn. A lot of other things were born in the house, but these were the only humans. We had dogs, cats, unwelcome skunks, and mini chickens that spent their first days in a cardboard box near the wood stove in the kitchen, so they would stay warm. We had cows in the barn or in the pasture to milk, and mules to pull the plows in the field. Every year, Great-Grandma would get 100 chickens. She'd order them out of a catalog. Can you imagine ordering chickens from a catalog? She was an extraordinary woman and seldom lost any of the baby chicks. She'd take care of them like they were babies. She'd kill these chickens for meat, but would keep some of them to lay eggs, and she'd sell the eggs. She'd call this her egg money. And with the money, she bought the few things she could from the big catalog for us, for holidays or for school. We got all of our school shoes from the catalog. Most of our shirts and dresses were made from flour sacks that great-great-grandma would carefully buy or trade other women for to get enough to make things. So they would get those big flour, you know, that you have flour in that you make cookies. They used to have big sacks that had material on them, and they would put the flour in there, and when the flour sacks were empty, your great-grandma would get it sewn into a dress. That was her dresses, made out of flour sacks. That's how they did it back then. Your great-great-great-grandma did most of the sewing because great-great-grandma wasn't the greatest on a sewing machine. She did make all the sheets and the blankets for our beds, but dresses are a little harder to make. So she left it up to her mother, your great-great-great-grandmother. Can you imagine great-grandma wearing a dress made of a flour sack? I sure did. And if great-great-great-grandmother could find a piece of lace or fancy stuff, it all went on the dress. She was a very special lady, her grandmother. She made the best cakes in all the world and spread a brown icing on top that makes me hungry even now. Uncle Dale, so that would be your great, yes, your great Uncle Dale and I walked to school from our house at the end of the little road, and many things happened on the way to and from school, and those I will start to tell you if you want. The first story will start about the storm cellar if you want. I don't know if she wrote that story about the storm cellar. If she did, I can't remember it. Well, I was really happy to read that story to you. So I hope that you're having a really good winter break. I know that you're pretty excited to be able to go and see your papa. I think that's so cool. It's been really nice reading the story about Arkansas. It's cool to learn about new places, isn't it? And to learn about your great grandma's life when she was growing up. I like reading it over and over because I forget these stories. Well, Jazz baby, that's it for now. I should have a couple more stories from your great-great-grandma. Your great-grandma. I just am never going to get that right. I have a couple more stories from her that I would like to read you later. I love you, Jazz baby. And you know, your mama loves you too. She'll always love you, always in your heart. And like you said, no one can ever take that away from you. No one. That's right. I love you, Jazz baby. You're so smart and such a great dancer.